That advances your slides.
Okay.
You want to help bring PowerPoint?
I can probably figure it out. I appreciate it though.
Plug in.
Was it F5? Yeah. All right. All right. Hi, everyone. Happy Friday. My name's Keith Hosey, and I am with the VA just now an entirety of 5 days. I come from a background of working in employment with people with disabilities, not specifically veterans with disabilities. However, I have worked previously with veterans, and what I'm going to talk about is reasonable accommodations, not only as it relates to veterans in the workplace, but really anyone with any type of disability in the workplace. So, if we're all ready, here's all my legalese that I'm going to give you. I am not a lawyer. I do not play one on TV. I didn't even stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. My point being, I am a trainer for the ADA National Network through the Southeast ADA Center. This presentation is through that organization that I'm a trainer for. Just know that you go into a court of law and say, Keith Hosey said this, they're not going to care. So nothing I say is legal advice. Please don't hold the Southeast ADA Center responsible, or my employer, or me. So enough of that. What is an accommodation? So a lot of employers, you go in and you talk about accommodations, and they get a little worried. What is this? What's an accommodation? Listen, I had an accommodation on my last job. I'll probably have the same thing on my new job. It's this really neat piece of technology. It's a little gel pad for my wrists for when I'm typing on a keyboard. That is an accommodation. A wrist guard for your mouse. So, you know, in those terms, a lot of us have had accommodations on the job. So it's easy to get bogged down with, you know, the technicalities of what something is. Essentially, it's just something that helps someone stay in their job, do it effectively. So here are our learning objectives this afternoon. We're going to learn what's an accommodation. I'm going to give some examples. We'll talk a little bit about cost, who can get accommodations, you know, how in the process can it request be denied, how do we ask for one, how's it decided, what about our employer asking us for medical information, who else can find out about it, and how does it all work. And I'm the same type of presenter. If you have questions either in the room or online, ask them as they come, because if I hold my question till the end of a presentation, it's gone. I don't remember it. So please ask if something pops up. If there's anything that isn't on this list that is a burning question for you, I might still get to it, but go ahead and ask it when you think it might be appropriate. And I may just say, hold that thought, I'm going to get to that, or we'll jump into it. So everyone's good with this? All righty. So what is a reasonable accommodation? We already touched on it a little bit. The EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, says that it's any change in the work environment or in the way things are customarily done that enables an individual with a disability to enjoy equal employment opportunities. It's important to know that's not just someone's job functions. That includes the application process, and it includes what they call employment benefits. So if you have a holiday party in December and you have a wheelchair user on your staff and you decide to have that holiday party in an inaccessible place, you know, that's not working. You're going to have to make an accommodation for that person and have it in an accessible place. Same thing with, say, interpreters, sign language interpreters. If you have a sign language interpreter for an individual who's deaf at staff meetings, you also have to have that interpreter for a staff luncheon or a holiday party or an annual picnic. So here are some examples. This is not an exhaustive list of accommodations. It's just something to get your brain start to think about accommodations. So we talk about assistive technologies. We can talk about screen readers for individuals who are blind or have low vision, like JAWS, or you also have technology where if someone doesn't have the dexterity to type, they can speak to text. Windows and other operating systems are starting to have those built in as well. You have things like I mentioned, interpreters or captioning. Sometimes you have real-time captioning in meetings if someone requests it, CART services. We have changes in schedules or changes in break times. Those are actually two of the most common accommodations in the workplace. So if someone is, let's say they have a disability that makes it more difficult to get up in the morning, or they're taking a medication for their disability that makes it harder to get up first thing in the morning, it takes them a little longer. Maybe they can work with their employer. Instead of being at work at 7:30, they have to be there at 8:30, but then they have to stay a little later in the afternoon. If they're full-time, or if they're part-time, you can still adjust that schedule. The point is that if you move it one way on one end of the spectrum and your start time, you want to move the end time too, because we still want that employee to work the full number of hours they're expected to work. We can change break times. There are exceptions to that. If you're working on the assembly line at Toyota, it's hard to give everyone else a break at 2 and you a break at 2:30 because you're stamping that last rivet. We can change a work location. So if someone has issues with distractions, or for example, someone with autism may not do well with artificial light, so we're going to put them in an office that has a window instead of an office without windows. Change in work environment. So someone, if it's noisy and that's distracting, maybe there's another area where they can sit. Eliminating marginal job tasks. So we're not talking about essential job functions. We're talking about things that are maybe part of the job, but are not totally required for that job to happen. Reassignment and leave, those are kind of last efforts if these other things don't happen. Let's talk a little bit about cost. A lot of people think accommodations cost a lot of money. 56% of accommodations don't cost anything. And back when I said that change in schedule or change in break time are the most common, there it is. That's why 56% cost nothing. When they do cost, it was $500 or less one-time costs. So when we look at an organization, I used to work for a small-ish nonprofit, and we had they still do have a lot of employees with disabilities. People often make requests for accommodations. If our small nonprofit can make those accommodations, I'm sure the large corporations can make those accommodations as well, and everyone in between. The employer is responsible for that cost, however. They can't pass it on to the employee or take it out of their pay or for whatever reason. There are some tax incentives. The work opportunity tax credit is one, and there's also tax credits for someone making their business more accessible. Who can get accommodations? A lot of times we think about the full-time employee somewhere, but it can be a part-time employee. It can be a seasonal or temporary worker. I can tell you that in college I worked part-time at a large video rental store. because there's a million of those around now. And I got an accommodation. I have a physical disability. They got me a stool that, everyone else stood at the register. I got a stool. I was part-time. I only worked when school was in. So this is with disabilities covered by the ADA, and that includes the ADA AAA, which is the Amendments Act. And we're not going to really get into the definition of what a disability is under those. Just know that the ADAAA has really strengthened and expanded what the definition of disability in the workplace. Is there a list that says this is a disability, this isn't, this is, this? No, there isn't a list. Although the ADAAA does specifically note a couple things as most likely being a disability, but it's not exhaustive, and it's not real specific. Another thing, so the individual has to be able to perform the essential functions of the job. That's with or without reasonable accommodation. So that person, if they can't do the job without accommodation, that doesn't disqualify them from the job. If they can get a reasonable accommodation and they can do those essential functions, then they're qualified for that job. Something else to keep in mind, individuals, I know we have some voc rehab counselors and individuals, job placement people online. If someone is working through a temporary agency, then they can still request an accommodation, and actually the employer and the temp agency are both on the hook to make sure that that accommodation happens. So they may have an agreement between each other that says, you have to do this, no, you have to do this. And they can figure that out. However, the accommodation needs to happen, and if it doesn't happen, they're both on the hook when it comes to a court of law, which I am not a lawyer. Any questions so far? It's really important in a business, and I don't know if we have any employers in the room or online. It's really important in a business to make sure that the people who might get accommodation requests know what to do. So you can see full-time employees, part-time employees, seasonal, temporary workers can all ask for an accommodation. They may not all go to the human resources or the EEO person and ask for those. They will most likely say something to their direct supervisor. So a lot of times companies are really great about training their human resources department about accommodations and the Americans with Disabilities Act and all these things, and here's what we have to do. But that frontline supervisor in this large corporation has no idea what an accommodation is. They don't know what they're supposed to do, and that's where the rubber meets the road, really. So something I always tell companies when I'm working with them is that, it's great that you're the expert on accommodations and you're the central person, but do you ever have training for your frontline staff on, and if it's nothing more than for them to say, okay, thank you for telling me that, I'm going to go get the expert and they're going to work it out with you. It's better than just having the blank look from the supervisor. Okay, so is there a magic word? No, there is not a magic word to get an accommodation. Someone just has to say that they're having trouble doing their job and it's due specifically to a medical condition or disability. Okay, I'm not a morning person, so it's hard for me to get up and get to work. That's not related to a disability. If I take medicine that makes it hard for me to get up in the morning, that is affecting my job performance. So an individual can request that. It can come from a third party. So if my wife calls my employer and says, hey, listen, he's not showing up at work on time and I want to tell you it's because of this medicine, she can do that, and the employer has to respond to that. So an employee can make a request in plain language. We can do it in writing. An employer can have a formal process. So they can say you have to fill out this form to request an accommodation. That needs to be out there so people know. It can't be a secret form over on some server. And if someone does come to a person with authority and says, I'm having trouble doing my job and it's because of my disability, then that person should be trained to say, okay, let's get you help. Here's a form, you need to fill it out, and we need to go through this process, and that's how we're going to get this. The employer must respond to an accommodation request in a timely manner. Who has the specific definition of what a timely manner is? Does anyone have a specific? No, no one does. The courts don't. The people who wrote the ADA don't. A timely manner is really subjective. I would say that waiting a year is probably not a timely manner. It's just something where an employer can't just kind of sit on that and not act. This might be a good time to talk about disability disclosure. I get a lot of people ask, when should I disclose that I have a disability to my employer? Should I walk in on my first day and say, hey, I'm bipolar. Thanks for giving me this job. Let's get started. Should I say it in the interview? Should I? So my answer is that opinions on when someone should disclose their disability are like fingerprints. Everyone has one and they're all different. I will tell you, my opinion is that you should disclose a disability to your employer when you need an accommodation. That's what I think. Your disability is affecting your job performance. That's when you tell your supervisor or HR or whoever you should tell that you have a disability, because you need some type of accommodation to mitigate what's happening due to your disability. And for me, that seems like the right time to do it. Like I said, it's like fingerprints. Everyone has an opinion on this. One thing to note, though, if I am showing up late to work and it's a pattern and I've been disciplined for that by my employer and I have not told them that it's due to a disability, then when I say the magic words that I have a disability and this is why I've been showing up late, if they've already written me up, that write-up is allowed to stay in my file. Once I've said I have a disability and that I need an accommodation, then they can't proceed with further action until they try and accommodate me. But anything that happens before me disclosing that and asking for an accommodation still stands. So I can't come back, I can't get fired for not showing up to my job on time for an entire week and then come back and say, hey, I had a disability, I think you're discriminating against me, because I didn't give them notice. So that's something important to keep in mind. Anytime an employer has a specific process that they want an employee to go through, it can't be burdensome, or it needs to stay really focused on the task at hand. It needs to be related to job necessity, and it needs to be related to the accommodation ask. I should have taken this out of here. People, don't ask any questions on this slide because it's really a sticky issue. Accommodation requests can be denied. First of all, let's talk about the easy parts. The ADA has 3 prongs of disability, and one of those is regarded as having a disability. So you don't actually have a disability, but your employer treats you like you have a disability. You can't get an accommodation for that because there is no disability that you're accommodating. So someone who's regarded as disabled cannot request an accommodation. Let's get that out of the way. The employer doesn't have to get rid of essential functions of the job or reduce the performance standards. So if my job is to make 20 widgets an hour, and because of a disability, I'm making 18, my employer needs to work with me on how I can effectively be accommodated so I can make 20 as well. The accommodation doesn't have to be that I'm only held to a standard of 18 when everyone else is held to a standard of 20. If my essential functions are to make widgets, I can't say, well, my accommodation needs to be that I don't make widgets. because that's in the essential functions. Now, just because a company lists something as an essential function doesn't really necessarily mean it is an essential function. So when the rubber meets the road in the court systems, companies have been told that's not an essential function. So, my job as receptionist, and answering the phone is essential function, greeting people at the front desk is an essential function, making photocopies once a month for board meetings, that's probably a marginal function, even if the company lists it as an essential function. Okay? Requests can be denied if it's an undue hardship to the organization. So financially, a lot of times that talks about financially undue hardship. We're talking about the entire organization. So if I work for a department of 3 in a giant agency, that department can't say we don't have enough money to buy you a standing desk because we're just this tiny department, but we employ 5,000 other people and we have a budget of $100 million, but this department doesn't, so we can't buy that for you. The company can't say that. You have to look at the entire resources of the company when you're talking about financial hardships. If there's a safety risk, so let's talk about I'm working at Toyota and I'm on the line and it's automated and I want my break at 2:30 instead of 2 o'clock. Well, there may be an actual safety risk to that happening, because if I'm not on the line doing X, Y, and Z, the guy 2 stations down from me might be injured, or I might be injured. Something, but it has to be specific. It can't just be kind of theoretical. I think someone probably will get hurt if we do that. The company has to have good reason to suspect that it will be a direct threat. Okay. So I go into my employer and I say, I need an accommodation. I can't type on my keyboard because I don't have dexterity in my hands, so I want Dragon Naturally Speaking. For those of you that may not be familiar with Dragon, it's speech to text. You get a little microphone and you can kind of talk and it types it for you. And so I think that I need the deluxe Dragon because that's really cool. It's got all the bells and whistles. Does my employer have to buy the deluxe version for me? Not unless it's the most effective. If I absolutely do need that to be effective at my job, then maybe they do. So the accommodation process is interactive and it's ongoing. A company should include the individual with the disability in their decision-making process. Now, that person doesn't have to be in every single meeting that the company has about this, but that individual should absolutely be included. They should be informed where they are in the process. They should be asked their opinion about what they might need. And I'm a huge proponent of the individual with the disability is the subject matter expert on that individual with the disability. I know what I need best for me. I've made it this far in life. I probably know what has helped me make it this far in life. Now, the company doesn't have to get a specific brand name product or a specific thing that the individual asks for, but they could look at alternatives that are just as effective. It needs to be a back and forth, and the individual needs to be involved, and the individual needs to know where we are in this process. I shouldn't go ask my supervisor for an accommodation, and a month, 2 months, 3 months, it's 8 months later, no one's told me anything. I'm still just sitting here at my job doing my thing, and I'm wondering if they even still remember I asked for that wrist guard. So I should know. I think I said everything on this slide without looking at it, so yay me. Again, when are you done in the accommodation process? I will say never. It's ongoing and it's interactive. So let's say Keith got that standing desk he really wanted. no, let's do a different scenario. I need, let's say I work for a business that's open 6 or 7 days a week, and I need Mondays off because I have doctor's appointments, and they're all on Mondays. So I go into my employer and I say, listen, I need Mondays off, and I'm not on the line where I have to be there at a specific time, or, it's not something that's time sensitive, that I have to be there or it doesn't work. So I need Mondays off. We're open on Saturday. I'm willing to come in Saturday. Can I switch a shift with someone, while this medical stuff is going on? Do I have till 2:30 or 3?
2:45.
2:45, excellent, okay. I can do that. So I asked for Mondays off. Great, I got it. I'm going to my doctor's appointments. Time goes by. My employer should come back and say, hey, is this schedule still working for you? It's fine for us, but is it still working for you? Is this the best accommodation for you to meet your needs? And they should ask that somewhat regularly. And again, it's my responsibility as an employee if it's not working. Now all of a sudden my doctor will only see people on Wednesday. I need to go talk to my employer about that. Can medical documentation be collected? A lot of people, I've heard people in the past request accommodations and then say, I can't believe it, they're asking me for medical documentation. That's none of their business. Well, if you ask for an accommodation, it is. They're allowed to ask for proof of disability. They're allowed to ask for doctor's notes. It has to be specific to what you're asking for. They're not allowed to ask for your entire medical history or things that aren't related to what you're asking for. So, they don't need it all, and it has to be kept confidential. So if the company has a centralized person, then that person's going to collect the information, keep it under lock and key or secure somehow. If it's the manager, then they need to keep that confidential. They are allowed to ask for information, more information related to your disability and how that might be affecting your job. Okay. So I touched on this a little bit. I ask for an accommodation. I give the HR person my doctor's information about my schizophrenia, and the next day I go in and the receptionist is like, I never would have thought you had schizophrenia. That's okay. Yeah, I never, no. That information has to be confidential. That information is really a need to know basis. If someone needs to know, and sometimes people do need to know. So my direct supervisor might need to know that either that this is my diagnosis and this is what's going on, or that I'm getting an accommodation due to some type of diagnosis. My coworkers probably don't need to know. They may need to know that I'm getting an accommodation. Hey, why does Keith get to come in late every single day? I'm getting written up when I'm 5 minutes late, probably 15 minutes late. And as a supervisor, I have to walk that line. I can't say, well, Keith has taken these psych meds and it's hard for him to get up in the morning, so we've worked out a deal with him. He comes in late, he stays late. You don't see him here till 6 o'clock because you go home at 4:30. You don't see that, but that's what's working out. No. As the manager, I can say, I hope you understand that I respect all of my employees' privacy. So just know that Keith's has asked for the ability to do this, and this is something we've worked out with him. I would hope that if you had a life situation where you needed something that and wanted us to respect your privacy, that we would do that too. And I hope you can respect that for Keith as well. So that can be sticky, and a lot of times when I talk to employers about that, hands fly in the air, and just, I don't know how we can do that because, everyone thinks this person's getting special treatment. Well, no, they're getting an accommodation so they can do their job effectively. Hey, I'm sorry, but that's on you how to figure out how you tell your other employees. It's not going to be that Keith has a disability and we're accommodating him. you can't give that out. So how can we make it work? Accommodations, a lot of times we talk about good faith efforts. Sometimes the first accommodation doesn't work. Sometimes, if at first you don't succeed, try and try again. Really, as long as the employer is being interactive in this process and they're really trying to make something work, then that's not going to be held against them. Hopefully the employee understands, we can try this, and especially that employer is really working with the employee saying, okay, well, that didn't work, let's try this. What kind of feedback do you have for us on this? What part of this didn't work? What do you think might work better? If it's a larger company, I think it works well when there's a centralized person that does accommodation type of stuff. That doesn't mean managers won't be involved, maybe, but that person really has kind of the knowledge and know-how about accommodations and the law. And again, as long as those frontline managers know that, what is an accommodation? What do you mean we change things around sometimes when someone has a qualifying disability? They need to know. Not all accommodations are equal. I said before, leave and reassignment a lot of times are last resorts. And I'm not going to get too much into that. Hopefully we're all happy people and we get to a great solution before we get to that. And again, it goes back to a trusting environment in the workplace. If I think my boss is out to get me, I'm not going to ask for an accommodation. I've worked with people, I've done employment in more than one organization. I've worked with people with all types of disabilities. People have different life experiences, and I've had people refuse to ask for an accommodation because they didn't want to disclose their disability, and that is that person's choice, absolutely. However, you might lose your job then because you're not performing the essential functions satisfactorily. So, think about that. And most of the time, I have never spoken to an employer that says, yeah, and why would they tell me this? But, if someone asks for an accommodation, I'm figuring out how to get rid of that person because they're just trouble. No, I will tell you sincerely, every employer I've ever talked to about this, they say, all I want is someone who's going to come to work, be able to do the job, really, and not have a bad attitude, obviously. So, if putting blocks under the table is going to raise a desk for a wheelchair user so they can use their computer, of course I want to do that because I want to make that, a productive employee is good for the company. I want to remove any barrier that's out there so this person can be the best employee they can be because that's good for us. Any questions? I hope I
have a comment.
I addressed your question previously just a little, but if you have any follow-up questions.
I have my own opinion on, I think, why this is. I think what happens a lot of times when they go through the hiring process, that this issue may not be addressed from the employer's standpoint. And the individual thinks that should I raise a question about a disability, they are going to fire me. They are going to let me go. So there's that hidden issue. It's just like in the military. If you had a security clearance, 9 times out of 10, if you had a mental health issue, you never ever went to see the psychs,
right? Because
you knew they'd pull your clearance,
right?
So it's a sort of a continuation of that aspect of their business life.
And especially when we're talking about our veterans, there's so much that plays into that. There's the pride factor, there's the self-reliance factor. All of that, and there's I'm not saying there isn't stigma out there against people with different types of disabilities, and I'm not saying discrimination doesn't exist, but the majority of employers I've spoken to, they want a good employee, and they want them to be able to work. Yes, ma'am.
And I just have a comment in part related to what you're talking about and in part related to earlier. I'm one of the social workers. I'm from the Lexington Vet Center, which is funded by the Veterans Health Administration, so the same as the VA. And we are specifically a counseling office, so oftentimes for employment-specific things, we'll be referring out to y'all. But we do offer hours that are outside of those bankers' hours that are traditionally work hours. So we can do evenings, we can do weekends, those kinds of things. So if somebody does need an employment situation that keeps them there during the day, there are options to have them see a counselor. Now, we can't do psychiatry and other kinds of things like that if that is involved in their frequency of appointments. But I just wanted to kind of put that out there in case anybody was trying to think about accommodating appointments with the employment. And then also there's a couple people at the VA, I believe there's 2 people that work in that arena, that deal with the veterans that are incarcerated, and they're called Veterans Justice Outreach in case somebody needed the title for that office. You can just contact the VA hospital and they have an office in there.
Thank you. Yeah, our VJO people are awesome, and the Vet Center is awesome. I'm not familiar with, I'm from Louisville, so I love our vet centers. If you're working with a combat veteran, then send them on over to the vet center because they are awesome. Any other questions? And likewise, I'm not real familiar with the Lexington VA, and again, I'm 5 days on the job with the Louisville Medical Center, but as many hospitals are, they're open not just bankers' hours. So, it's possible they can work with an individual on those appointments.
We've got a comment from the chat box from Natasha Masters. Veterans Justice Outreach, Kathy Vasquez.
Yes, thank you.
Kathy Vasquez, 859-233-4511.
More time.
859-233-4511.
Did she give her extension in there?
Extension 3177.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
And for those that are in other parts of the state, Lexington has a vet center, Louisville has a vet center. We have VJO in Louisville as well. So, you just look at your radius to your medical centers and you'll see where you can get some of those services. Any other questions for me? Here are some resources. EOC, Job Accommodation Network is phenomenal. I love them. You can call them. It can be an anonymous call, or you can tell them your name and information and they can call you back. They're really great with accommodations. Again, I am wearing several hats here. With the Southeast ADA Center is who this presentation is from. I'm a trainer for them. They're a great resource. You can call them with questions about the ADA, and they will get back to you on that. You may not get someone right away who can answer that question, but they're a fantastic resource as well.
Can you put that back up?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I'll just leave it up. Any other questions for me? Well, thank you all.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you, David. Appreciate y'all's time and attention. Have a good rest of the afternoon. Thank you.